I honestly think that life's the best teacher, better than an MBA. And so I think get lots of different experiences, try and work in different functions, whatever that means in an individual's context, and then work out where you want to be and apply all those lessons.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Ben Morton Leadership Podcast. It's the weekly show that brings you inspiring interviews with senior leaders and genuine subject matter experts, all designed to help you be the very best leader you can possibly be. It's my gift to you and it's completely free. In today's episode, which is an absolute cracker, we are talking about building great teams, culture, overcoming adversity, and what it's like to row the North Atlantic Ocean with Peter Fletcher. Pete is an incredibly humble and inspirational man, so I know you're absolutely going to love this episode. Specifically though, in this episode, you will learn the leadership lessons drawn from Peter's North Atlantic row and their practical application for your team or organisation. You will learn strategies for developing a collective mindset and culture within your organisation and really fostering a sense of unity amongst your people. We're exploring the secrets to building an extraordinary level of teamwork, including the teamship focus that enhances collaboration. We're looking at the importance of celebrating success and effective ways to do it within your team and organisation, which really came from the final 2 hours of Pete's North Atlantic row, when he knew they were going to succeed, but he had a couple of hours on the deck of the boat by himself to savour and take it all in. We also look at some of Peter's incredible stories of overcoming adversity during that role, and the crucial role of connection and human relationships in achieving success. And this is illustrated through some personal stories of mine and Pete's about where certainly I got this wrong. Plus lots more. That is enough of an introduction, though, from me. So let's dive right in to this week's episode and my interview with Pete Fletcher. Pete, can you start off by telling us about your first memorable leadership experience in the workplace, like good or bad, and how that has gone on to shape you as a leader and influence your own leadership style?
Yeah, sure thing, Ben. You know, it's a bit of a strange one. I was just 18 years old and actually still in school, and I was at a kind of rugby playing school, and I was sort of had the honour of being the first 15 captain, and we had a great win early in the season against, a really big school, and we all went out and celebrated, of course. So, but what I learned that day is, in fact, it was the following day I kind of got called into the headmaster's study, and he tore some sort of strips off me, and I certainly learned that day that when something goes wrong, if you're the leader, like it or not, you got to kind of own it. So I've actually since reflected on that, and it's kind of when I think, especially when things go wrong, that you have to own it most.
And how have you carried that through to how you operate now? Is it just that piece around owning the failures as well as the wins, or is there other stuff you took forward from that?
Let's just say none of us are perfect. And of course, we aspire, to do all these things that we know we should. But I think that's definitely one, when things don't go right, you've got to own it, because it is the leader's responsibility to get it right. And I think we as leaders do really know and believe that. And then, of course, on the flip side, when things go well, it's actually a real joy, isn't it, to recognize and celebrate, the accomplishments of others, basically, when the team works really well, or when you get some successes, and actually it's always the team's success. So
yeah, that reminds me of the famous quote, and I think it's from John Wooden, I'm not sure if he was an American football coach, and he said something along the lines of, when things go badly, I did it. When things go okay, we did it. And when things go really well, that they did it. That's all it takes to get people to win football games. And it's so true, right? But it can be hard to act on, I think.
Ben, that is the perfect quote for what I'm trying to say. I think that's exactly right. And, again, it's about doing our best and probably just trying to take a bit of humility into every experience and reflection of each experience.
Yeah. And I wonder, Pete, do you think that mindset that you're sharing here can be learned, or how innate do you think it is? And the reason I ask is, if we're going through our career and we've got some sort of ambition to continually get promoted and one day be a MD, CEO of some scale of organization, I guess there's a balance, right, in that we're trying to demonstrate our own competence and what we can deliver, because that will, many of us think, will get us promoted. But at the same time, if we really want people to follow us, as you've said, and as John Wooden said, we really need to own those mistakes, and when things go well, push the team forward. So it's a delicate balancing act, isn't it, by sort of demonstrating our own competence and achievements whilst not stealing the credit for people. And clearly you learned it to a degree based on that experience when you was captain in the first 15. But knowing you as I do, I suspect that was already in you to a degree. So this isn't quite the leadership nurture nature question, but what's your view on that, Pete?
Well, I think it's a great question. I when you were asking it, I was thinking about nature nurture. I mean, just to use that analogy, I am absolutely firmly on the nurture side. I absolutely think that leaders are made, not born. And, I think every single experience you have, personal, interpersonal, everything contributes to who you are, of course. And I think leaders are made, not born. That day, I tell you what, I did not walk in expecting that I was going to bear all responsibility for what happened, but I walked out knowing that that is exactly what I had to do. And that was a really good lesson. But to answer your question, if you really think about who enables people to step up or to step into bigger or more senior roles or, leadership positions, although anyone can be a leader, but actual explicit leadership positions, it's other leaders. And I think that they have got there because they're good leaders themselves and they understand what it takes to be a leader. In many cases, I would certainly hope so. So I think actually people recognize those qualities, and it's much more about actually displaying them and being a great leader rather than, trying to sort of appear like you're doing all the right things or that you're the right person. I think being the right person is far more important than looking like you're the right person.
Yeah, absolutely. Going to go, it's not really off tangent, it's off tangent on some of the questions I thought we would discuss. But just then, Pete, when you were saying that they know what it takes to be a leader, let's explore that then. For you, what does it take to be that good, solid leader that people will follow because they want to, not because they have to?
Reflecting on leadership qualities is a really important thing, actually. And with that kind of which leaders we admire and all that sort of stuff. And as you say, this is, off the top of my head, really. But some of those qualities, for me, when I think about leadership, and of course, there's lots of definitions, there's lots of different images you can conjure up. But for me, it's almost taking like a diverse group to a sort of shared vision, to a shared future. And so, vision, I think, is really important. I think conviction is crucial. And what I mean by that is, a conviction in where we're going to get to and to some degree the path we're going to take, although I think the how is less leadership than the end destination. I think then a willingness to empower people, have that balance between sort of do what, if you're going to ask others to do, you've got to be willing to do it yourself, but also empowering people as well.
Yeah, love that. Pete, on a slightly different tangent, I'm really interested to explore this with you. So you were, I don't know if you still are, the first Australian to row the North Atlantic, right? Which puts you in a pretty small and unique club, I'd imagine. Before I get into some questions around leadership and teamwork related to that, like what on earth made you want to do that? Was it always something you aspired to do? Was it you read or saw something that inspired you to do it? Like, first of all, like, where did the idea come from?
No, it was definitely not something I always aspired to do. I think it was, in some regards, quite opportunistic. I think that the desire came from, well, in fact, there's probably two things I could point to. One, I have for a long time had a desire to sort of, take risks for risk's sake, but to live a sort of life that with no regrets, as it were. And part of that came from, I was lucky to survive a car accident when I was in my early 20s. And that did change my outlook on life a little bit, that sort of sense of liberty and such. But actually, I think a lot of the sort of, the foundation came actually from the World Challenge ethos, the organization that I'm fortunate to run. That is obviously about, what experiential learning. So what do we learn from, we work with young people, obviously. And Ben, your background as well, you'll relate to this wholeheartedly. But of course, it was really from the World Challenge ethos of wondering what would I learn from this challenge and from being out of my comfort zone.
This is more a question for me. So it's a slightly selfish question in some ways. What was your, if you don't mind sharing, family circumstances at the time? Kind of, were you married at that point? Did you have kids yet at that point? Because I'm always curious, right? There is clearly an element of risk with doing some sort of challenge like that. So yeah, what did that look like?
Married with three young girls, and the follow-up question I could probably anticipate, really, my wife's wonderful, really understanding, but although she's not a kind of real adventurer herself, she's got that sort of adventurous mindset and spirit where, whether or not it's emigrating from the UK to Australia or, just wanting to sort of live that sort of life. So I think she actually probably, I think, understood it a lot more than other people did in a way. But I think it obviously put a lot of pressure on her, in a way, perhaps more pressure on her than on me, because she kind of had to live with the, you know what I mean, the sort of reality of what is he doing it, and maybe what if he doesn't, it doesn't go as well as it should.
Yeah, and I think the bigger challenge with big sort of events and endurance events like that people don't always necessarily appreciate, and it was certainly my experience when I rode the Tour de France for charities. It's not so much the actual event or challenge, is it? But it's all the time and effort that goes into the training that can, I guess, burden is the right word, put a burden on sort of family life and the rest of your life, right? It's not just however many weeks, I don't know how many weeks it takes to row the North Atlantic, but it's not just the time involved to do that, is it? Where we're sort of asking for the support and the forgiveness from our family.
Exactly. You're spot on. And you're speaking from experience. I think the preparation for any adventure is like 90% of it, 95% of it. I think there's an element of truth in that. And I think it's also the fact that you sort of mismanage expectations in the preparation. People know you're going to be away for the period you're actually on the water or on the bike or whatever it might be. But they don't expect for the year prior you're going to be rebuilding the boat, or you're going to be training, or you're going to be whatever it is.
Yeah. And Pete, you said the challenge was partly born out of the World Challenge ethos of experiential learning. And this is a big question because there was probably a lot, I suspect. But maybe if we focus it in terms of leadership and teamwork, but we don't have to. What were some of, I guess, the most significant and perhaps enduring things that you learn from the experience and from the whole experience, right? As we're saying, the training and the actual row itself.
I can talk into a little bit into the teamwork and leadership, if you like, because I did sort of, I think, have some learnings. I mean, I was very fortunate. I did it as a pair, a rowing pair. So I had my friend Tom Hudson, who was really, really an incredible person, really capable. But we were also very different. Although we've got some, real consistency around our values and some of the, the foundational stuff, we've actually got very different skill sets. And that was a huge blessing. So, the sort of classic, you need a diverse team was absolutely a lesson that was reinforced on the ocean. And just to sort of give an example, he's got a sort of engineering style mind, and I don't at all. So he was the fixer. He could fix stuff and our solar went down, he got it working. The water maker goes down, he was able to get it working. Our steering went down after 4 days, and we had to build a traditional foot steering system out of, like, you'd laugh if I showed you what it was made from, and he did all that. And then I was probably a little bit more understanding of the ocean and maybe how to get the best out of the boat. And perhaps adverse weather and storms and how to manage that sort of thing. So we were complementary there, and so I think the overall capability was really sound. But then the other thing I'd just say about teamwork is, there's a skill set and then there's a sort of mindset. And I think I had underestimated the importance of mindset in success and in teams. And we spent more time working on our culture. I sort of think of culture now really as a collective mindset, almost like capability might be your kind of collective skill sets in an organization. I sort of think as culture as your collective mindset. And I think we spent far more time working on our culture, even on the boat between two people, than we did our capability. And that's even acknowledging the fact that the capability part was huge. We're rowing around the clock. We had to deal with hurricane. We had to, deal with, all sorts of different things that were just brand new. The culture piece was still far bigger. So what do I do with that now? I just think a bit about, we think about culture in certain different ways, but I think a lot more about mindset within that culture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, can you expand on that a little bit, Pete? Kind of what you mean by mindset within culture, and for anybody listening, what is sort of something they could practically take, sort of based on your experience in the boat, and I'm sure how you've carried that into the entire organisation at World Challenge?
To some degree, motivation is sort of synonymous as well. But I'll give some examples on the boat. We were rowing 2.5 hours on, 2.5 hours off around the clock. And the hardest shifts, although I liked them, were the night shifts. So you might not have even slept an hour. You might not have slept at all, but you just got to get yourself back up and back on the rowing seat while the other one takes some time out. And we would do things like leave a hot flask on deck so that when you came up, you could, what I mean, for Tom, his thing was coffee, and I'm a sort of tea guy, but you could make a hot drink, or we would, purposely give the person something to think about, like a question of, I want to know your top 10 of X, or, just thinking about how to get that help that person through the next shift and the next, hour, 2 hours. And I think in an organization, when I think about mindset, I think about, I'm really thinking about, okay, where is it? Really, your culture is a collection of all the individual mindsets in the organization. So are they geared for success? Do they believe in the vision and the journey? Do they know what they've got to do? Do they know where they fit in? Are they motivated to do it? And how can we work together as individuals to make it that little bit easier for the person next door, that little bit easier for the team that you're liaising with, or whatever it might be. So yeah, I think there's a few things we do. We also, I suppose, just on that front, celebrating success is pretty key, to keep that motivation alive. We have a recognition scheme, peer nominated. So every week we have an all-team meeting where every single person in the organization nominates somebody for something that they've done, going above and beyond, or to help them out, or whatever it might be. And that's amazing, because as a sort of leader, you sit there and you hear, you just I feel humbled every week by hearing one person celebrate or thank somebody else in the organization on the call in front of everybody. And not only is the recognition so valuable, but also you learn a hell of a lot about what's going on in the organization, because they're all things you just wouldn't otherwise hear. So I really love that. Perhaps that's one thing that people could take away.
I want to come back to this piece around celebrating success and recognition in just a second, Pete. And I also want to go back to what you was just saying around mindset and teamwork, because completely by chance, actually, in the last few podcast episodes, it's ended up being a bit of a theme that we're talking about. And it's really interesting that you gave that example of sort of when you're doing your shift, you're also thinking about, well, what can I do to help the next person be as good as they can be? And this is particularly poignant for me because just this weekend, as we're recording this, weekend past, I've just been back to the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, where I did my training to be an officer in the army, because one of my friends is posted there at the minute, and it just straight away brings back all the memories, and you feel slightly intimidated even being back in the grounds. But one of the things I've started to realise is Sandhurst is famous for leadership training, but actually, as much as it teaches you how to be a leader, it teaches you how to be an amazing team player. And it's almost more inadvertent and sort of under the radar that they teach you that. But essentially very quickly you start to realize that sort of your individual success, i.e. passing the course, is reliant on the other 29 men or women who are in your platoon, because you're all going to be taking it in turns at some stage to be in a leadership position. So you can either be a good team player and try and make their job easier and make them look good, or, to excuse my language, you can be a bit of a dick. But if you're the latter, then when it's your turn, they're not going to be particularly inclined to help you. So you do get into this mindset of doing everything you possibly can to support the people around you and make them the best they can be. And it's funny, like in the army, it almost becomes this fear about like not being Jack. And by Jack, I mean like, I'm all right, Jack. I'll just look after myself. And it sticks with you, because I was at an awards ceremony for my daughter's swim club, which was hosted in the school. And like we had to leave the school dining room tidy because we'd hired it from the school. And I looked around at the end, there was like one woman who grabbed the broom and started sweeping. And immediately I just did the same. Now, it's not a criticism or judgment. Like 98% of the other parents just got up and left, and there's 2 or 3 of us kind of sweeping, tidying up. It just gets ingrained in you. But yeah, I sometimes wonder if there's more we can do in the business world to sort of teach teamwork and teamship, because you don't quite have the same experiences that really lead you to focus on it in the corporate world. So I'm not sure there's particularly a question in there, Pete, but like, what comes up for you as we're exploring this concept?
I love hearing that story about Sandhurst, and I think, although I never had the fortune of going to Sandhurst or being in the army at all, I'm sort of envious actually of you saying that, because I can sort of feel it. For me, it's what comes up is reciprocation. It only needs one person to start to do those things, and if the right people are in the organization and they recognize it, then good deeds are reciprocated. So I think it's about selection, selecting the right people that have the sort of natural inclination to work like that, and then just trying to, you need a trigger, don't you? You need to, and then it's celebrating those behaviors and looking for a way to recognize them and celebrate them out in the open. And then obviously when things undermine them, then you've got to nip them in the bud quickly.
And then circling back to your point around sort of recognition, Pete, and pausing to celebrate success. In preparing for today's conversation, I was doing a bit of internet research / stalking on you, and I stumbled across a few videos of you talking about the row. One of the things that really struck me was there was a point when you knew you had, or you absolutely would complete the row, but you hadn't yet touched dry land, and you was very conscious of trying to sort of pause and really take in the achievement and the moment, which I think is wonderful. And again, in the workplace, it's something that we can easily neglect, right? Because we hit a target, we have a win. There's always another target to hit or another challenge to solve. And I see this all the time, just skipping from one goal to the next or one crisis to the next, and never actually pausing to say, do you know what? This is really good. And I think even better than that is pausing to review some of those wins. Because again, we tend to review when things go badly, but how often do we learn the lessons of success so we can hopefully repeat it? So I guess 2 questions. I'd just love to hear a little bit more about those last couple of hours of the row. And then again, for people listening, sort of what are some things that you think they can practically take and use in their organizations to, I guess it's about building the culture, building that collective mindset, right?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Ben. It's such a vivid memory for me. I suppose just to sort of try and convey it a little bit, the row was not easy. 98 days on the ocean.
Is that the world's biggest understatement? The row was not easy. That says a lot about your character, Pete.
Well, to be honest, Ben, we made it difficult. It could have been a lot easier, but we stuffed up enough things that we made it difficult. We rebuilt an old timber rowing boat. We decided we'd make our own food on a ketogenic diet, so high fat food that's hard to dehydrate. Oh, we didn't literally make it, but we had someone make it. Because we rebuilt the boat, we ourselves with a boat builder, we had massive gear failure. We lost 40% of our food spoiled, so we were rationed for 7 weeks. The water maker kit was almost packing up, so there's too much salt in the water we were drinking. There was all sorts of things that made it incredibly difficult. And so we kind of got over the line of 5 degrees west, and then the following day I saw land. Actually, we'd had a food drop as we crossed the line, or after we crossed the line from the Navy, right, which was they were actually out on exercise, so it wasn't like they came out to give us a food drop, but it was we were so grateful.
They must have been the first people you'd seen, right?
They were, yeah, they were, and they were in a rib, 4 of them, and we kind of got, including the chef, and they were kind of, I don't know, I suppose you get dropped out on a rib. They're probably not out on a rib every day, many miles from land, and we were there just sort of taking the food over the rail, just so grateful. But the point is, Tom there was about 4 days worth of food, and Tom I had some too, but Tom had the lion's share in about 19 hours gone. So he was pretty sick, because he'd taken a real bullet for the team in a way, because he had drunk more of the water that was too salty. We had a certain amount of ballast water that we could sort of mix and all the rest of it. And he was more physically resilient than I was at that stage. So I was drinking more of that ballast water, and he was drinking more of the salt water. He then ate so much of the food, and he was almost in a really bad state. So I wasn't sure when we got to land. I wasn't sure exactly what medical care he might need, but he was. What it meant, the reason I'm telling is because I was on deck on my own, and for that penultimate day, and we had an amazing following wind. So I was rowing, effortless rowing after what we'd done, and full belly, just trying to get us in as quick as we could, and beautiful sunshine, right? So it was really a rare conditions. But we'd crossed the line, and there was that sort of sense of achievement. And then basically I saw land that afternoon, and it was just, I kind of got goosebumps actually thinking about it, but it was just unbelievable.
So have I, listening to you.
It was amazing, right? Because we knew we'd made it, and I knew my wife and kids were there in Cornwall. And the reason I sort of share that story like that is because it was very special, and it was the time, was a brief moment where I was able to sort of say for a few hours, yeah, wow, you should enjoy this moment. And I really tried to do that. But the point is, I suppose, to your question, how do you take that into life? And I think you actually mentioned, going from crisis to crisis, or from goal to goal. And I think it can be either or in a way. What I have done at certain times, and what I try to do is, that was land I saw that day, right? And it's the very land that is underneath my chair right now, and that that we walk on every day and step out of bed onto. And so I actually, it sounds really perhaps a bit abstract, but I sometimes literally just look at the ground and remember that moment of seeing land. And I can literally, when I do it, feel my heart rate slow, and some of the emotions kind of come back, and maybe I even smile, and I think what it does, it sort of takes me back to that place, out of the crisis, or out of the striving for the next goal, to just, do you know what I mean? Just really appreciate gratitude for not just the land on that day, but everything in life, and everything that land represents, I suppose.
Yeah, that's amazing, Pete. And actually, I think that's something that's really relevant, that kind of we can all take and use, whether we're a leader or not. And kind of on that one, right? I think I subscribe to the same view as you, that kind of we can all be a leader regardless of title. But my point is, we all get stressed and triggered, right, at various points during the working day or the working week. And one of the things I often talk about, sort of from the world of neuro-linguistic programming, is having some sort of anchor or trigger that causes you to step out of the moment and reset. And just from your experience, and then just looking at the ground or touching the ground, is an incredible anchor, right? Because it brings back those sort of positive emotions from that moment, and changes the heart rate. And we all have got some sort of really powerful, vivid experience when we was at our happiest, calmest, that we can try and take ourselves back to in those moments, just to reset when we need to. So that's super powerful.
Yeah, well said. I think that's exactly what it's like. And so much of it, I think it all happens between the ears, doesn't it? So if you can get some kind of control and intention in your mindset and subconscious, then it really changed the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And Pete, you've given loads of talks about your adventure there. What is one question that no one has ever asked you, but you really wish they had?
I tell you one thing I like to share, and that is some people maybe expect, but I think a lot of people perhaps don't, is just the extent of the wildlife that we experienced and, the beauty of nature. You might sort of think, oh, well, kind of going across the top of an ocean, well, how much do you see? Well, we saw, it was tremendous. I mean, we saw, people are always interested in great, did you see a great white? Yeah. We saw sharks up close, and we saw mum and bub whale shark come like a foot or two below right underneath the boat. We saw countless whales. There was one day, and it was a very rare day. Ocean was completely still, and there was a really dense sea fog because it was so still. There was no air moving. And we heard this sort of low rumbling sound, and we were sort of petrified that maybe because we'd actually rolled the boat previously and the electrics had gone down, and we were a bit worried that the AIS, which is like your little radar which shows boats in the area, was down. And so we were worried that the low rumbling noise that we could hear in the fog was perhaps a tanker or something. Anyway, the fog sort of started to clear after 10, 15, 20 minutes, and we start to see dolphins, and eventually all you could see, it was phenomenal, was just countless dolphins across the horizon, literally on the horizon, almost going, feeding in unison from sort of right to left across the horizon. And that was the sound. It was honestly a spectacle that I would never have imagined, or I've never seen on TV, or we swam with dolphins that day, celebrating 1,000 nautical miles from land, from New York. And we didn't swim very much. I mean, it was sort of there's too much water moving around most of the time. But yeah, so the nature probably, Ben, you know what I mean? It was just,
Yeah.
It was pretty breathtaking.
And isn't it strange that as you're talking about nature, I can hear the birds in the back of your garden?
Well, that's cool. I like that. I actually closed the window, Ben, because I didn't want to, you know what I mean, sound like I was in a blooming bird aviary or anything like that. But there we are.
No, it's beautiful.
Good.
Pete, one final question linked to your row. I think it's interesting, however, whenever we sort of go through some sort of hardship or an extreme physical challenge, many of us will vow never to take certain things for granted again. Like when I came back from Iraq, I said, I'll never take a sort of warm, hot shower for granted again, and various things like that. What was something you vowed never to take for granted again? And have you stayed true to that vow that you made yourself?
That's a very insightful question. So thank you. Yes and no.
You're human.
Yeah, inevitable no, because we got so hungry that food was one of those things that we saw we'd never take for granted. And I mean, Tom would have lost 25 kilograms. I was probably not quite that bad, but some way behind him. But yeah, of course, take for granted completely. But it did take me a long time to start taking it for granted again, because I remember for about a good year, I pretty much didn't go anywhere without food in my pocket. It was quite strange. Yeah, I know that sounds bizarre, but I truly, truly did. So food was one, probably sleep, another one. And, totally take it for granted. And I definitely said, I promised myself I wouldn't, But the one that I think I've been better at, but not perfect, is, the thing I kept coming back to, and I wonder if it was the same for you when you were in Iraq or possibly elsewhere, was the relationships with your immediate family. I thought about my girls all the time, every day, and I think I sort of swore to myself that I would never take my relationship with them for granted, and try and preserve it and prioritize my relationship with them above other things, above being right, above getting my way, And I think as a parent, you have to do your parenting. Do you know what I mean? You're never going to always be liked, a bit like a leader, really. But I think I did hear some wisdom once around prioritize your relationship with them, because if you lose that, you lose any influence you can ever exert on them anyway, and any joy from the relationship. So yeah, that's one that I've tried to be better at, if you know what I mean. Tried not to take for granted.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, Pete. Like the last 18 months for me personally, and I've spoken about this a bit on various podcast episodes, been through some sort of real challenges and had some sort of low moments, sort of experienced quite a lot of loss and grief, and I partly through as well, put in so much into kind of my business and trying to be a great dad. And it happened slowly. I gradually started to lose connection with lots of kind of friends and stopped investing time in some of the other relationships. And it's strange. I don't know if this is a human thing, more of a male thing, but the more time that passed where I wasn't connected to some really good friends, it started to seem harder for me to then pick up the phone and talk to them again. And I say, luckily, I caught it just in time. In some ways, losing my best friend to suicide was a trigger to do that. So in some ways, it wasn't lucky. But yeah, my point in sharing that is kind of I've been at a real, I guess, turning point in life where I really start to realize that the stuff that is important is relationships and connection. I think it's what it is to be human. And if you look at all of the research from the Harvard longevity study that's been going on for, I think, 60 plus years, if you look at all of the, I think they call them the blue zones around the world, where you have the highest percentage of centenarians, the thing that all of that research points to is human connection and relationships. So it is so important, and not just in terms of living a happy, healthy life, but it translates directly back to the workplace, right? And I guess it's really nicely, and it circles us back to your road, Pete. Like, what got you through it was the connection and the relationship between you and Tom, no doubt. And when we have that, we're much more willing to go the extra mile and support our colleagues at work, right? And it can be so easy not to prioritize relationships. There's always tasks to do, right?
Yeah, God. Well, again, thanks to you for sharing that. And Ben, I'm so sorry to hear about your, desperately sorry to hear about your friend, your best mate. And it's very, very sad to hear it. And I think what you've just said is ever so true. Like, what matters at the end of the day and at the end of it all is how you make people feel, isn't it? It's relationships and your part in them, I suppose. I think I'm probably a fairly focused individual who hasn't always been brilliant with friend relationships, for example, especially moving across the other side of the world from the UK and all the rest of it. There are lots of friendships, or a few important friendships that I haven't maintained as well as I should have or could have. And my natural bias is probably to the people that are in nearby, or that have shared interests with at that moment, or in that this year of my life or whatever, rather than perhaps always trying to be there for people that you go a long way back with. I think I'm probably at that point now, Ben. We're a similar age, and I'm at that point where I sort of reflect on those things a little bit more now as well. And so you're sort of saying, is it a male thing? Is it an age thing? Is it I think it's all of those things. And the importance of relationships in the workplace cannot be overstated. There's a brilliant book, Power Score. I can't remember exactly the authors, but really talking about people, relationship, and priorities in one order or the other. And the fact is, your power score comes from multiplying your score out of 10 on each of those things. So relationships are literally as important as the people you've got and the priorities that you have. I only read that book once, but it stuck with me because I think it's again, speaks in the power of relationships.
Pete, I've got a new tradition on the podcast, in that always closing with the same question. And that is, what would you say is the best mistake that you've ever made?
There was one on the road that I'd love to share. Oh my goodness. I mean, this was so stupid. Bearing that we needed to take to row from New York to London was 70 degrees, so east-northeast. And we didn't have interactive weather. We didn't have anything like that. We didn't have any data. We were just going for it. But we somehow thought we were going to row south to try and get into the Gulf Stream. We thought it was about a day's rowing away. So we rowed south when we should have been rowing east-northeast for a day. Didn't get to the stream. Thought we were close. We were absolutely exhausted. And we were like, oh, we should probably just turn around and row to the UK. And we didn't. We kept going. And we were just almost killing ourselves rowing together, which is you never do that. That's like just absolute idiocy, because you once you're both tired, then nothing happens. So we rowed for 4.5 days, and we didn't find the Gulf Stream. And then we just stopped, and it was a sunset, and It was just an unbelievable sunset. It was a still ocean. And we just sat there and we just couldn't believe it. And then one of us, I can't remember who it was, would have just gone, oh, well, first world problems, and we just sort of picked ourselves up, as it were. And we were looking at the AIS and we zoomed right in. And it was literally to the minute. It was as soon as we let go of the fact that we'd made this big mistake and it was all stupid, it was our fault and everything else, our track changed from drifting. We were drifting southwest away from the UK after 5 days, and our track started tracking round to the south and southeast to the east, and eventually we started drifting towards the UK, the direction that the Gulf Stream would take us. And the speed was just started increasing, and we were like, oh my God, can you believe it? And we found the Gulf Stream. And the reason I tell it is because the next 3 or 4 days were just unbelievable. I mean, we were just flying for 3 or 4 days, and average speed, we'd been averaging 1 to 2 knots, and we were averaging 6 knots in the Gulf Stream. We were catching waves. We hit 17 knots going down a wave, and we ended up getting the Guinness World Record for the furthest rode in 24 hours in an old timber rowing boat. And that was a big mistake. Like, it was really a stupid thing to do. Ocean rowing, keep it simple. You don't have any really sophisticated steering. You don't have any way to increase your speed other than just row in the direction you need, make it the shortest distance possible. But it ended up being the best because we had an incredible time. We saw amazing wildlife in the stream. It was an absolute highlight, and somehow it worked in our favour.
Well, I can't help thinking, Pete, as you're telling that story, is it in the animated film Finding Nemo, where the Aussie turtles get in the sort of jet stream underwater to carry themselves home or away or whatever? I just had that image in my mind as I'm listening to you talk.
Jeez, it might be. Well, we were Nemo or whoever. Oh, we were the turtles. Honestly, it was just the thing that you really realise when you're in a boat with a sail, but definitely in a rowing boat, the currents in the ocean are just formidable. You don't see them, of course, but they are so powerful. And we learned that the hard way as well. We got a lift from the stream this time, but there were plenty of currents that were adverse as well. But anyway, there's one. I'm perhaps that was a bit of a jovial one, but
No, I love it. It's fantastic. Pete, thank you so much for your time today. It's interesting that towards the end there, we ended up talking about relationships and connection. Now, the thing that listeners won't realise, maybe some might have picked up on it, but we used to work together many, many years ago. It was sort of going back, 2006 to 2011 maybe. So it's been really, really lovely to reconnect. Been fascinating to hear about your row and all of the lessons that's taught you and how you've applied it and how we all listening to you can apply it to our teams or businesses, no matter how big or small they are. So thank you so much for your time, sharing your insights and knowledge. Congratulations again on the row and the Guinness World Record. And it's been really lovely talking to you again, Pete.
Thanks so much, Ben. It really has been it has been talking to an old friend. It has felt like we were almost doing this over a pint or a cup of tea, and it's been a real joy. So thanks so much for having me, Ben. Really appreciate it.
Thank you once again for joining Peter and me for this episode of the Ben Morton Leadership Podcast. If this conversation has resonated with you and if you've learned something from it, then please share it with your friends and colleagues so that they get the same opportunity. And before you go, do scroll through the podcast episodes and check out the Leaders Kit Bag. This is the new weekly micro edition of my podcast. Each episode is just 5 or 6 minutes long and focuses on one very practical leadership tip or tactic to help you be the best leader you can possibly be. So far, we've covered planning and prioritization, plus how to keep your teams motivated. And once again, when you've listened, please share them with your colleagues so that we can improve the leadership capability in our companies, charities, and institutions. After all, the world needs great leaders now more than ever. Until next time, look after yourself Look after those you've got the privilege and responsibility to lead. And until next time, lead on.